I should have walked away the moment they doubled my pay, Emily Carter would later admit. But at the time, standing outside a mansion that looked like it belonged in a movie, all she could think about was rent due in 3 days and the stack of unpaid bills sitting on her tiny kitchen counter. Yesterday, she had been fired from this exact property without warning, no explanation, just a cold, "We won't be needing you anymore." And now here she was again, staring at the same iron gates slowly opening as if nothing had happened, except this time they had offered her $36 an hour to clean the pool and maintain the backyard, nearly double what she usually made. And with one strange condition written in the message: "Do your job and don't ask questions." Emily hesitated for only a second before stepping inside, because when life cornered you hard enough, questions became a luxury you couldn't afford. The property was even more surreal up close, a wide glass mansion, stretching over what had to be at least half an acre, the pool shimmering like something out of a resort, not a private home. And yet there was no sign of a family, no laughter, no music, just silence thick enough to make her footsteps feel too loud. She grabbed her equipment and started working, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine, telling herself rich people were just weird. That was all. But then she heard a voice behind her, calm, steady, and way too close for comfort. "You came back," the man said, and when she turned around, she saw him for the first time, Daniel Brooks, dressed simply in a dark t-shirt and jeans. Nothing about him screamed wealth, nothing about him matched the house, and yet there was something in the way he stood, like he belonged there more than anyone else ever could. "I work here," he added before she could ask, almost like he had already predicted her question. And Emily nodded slowly, trying to read him, but he didn't offer anything more, no smile, no explanation, just that quiet presence that made her feel both watched and oddly safe at the same time. Over the next hour, Daniel stayed nearby, not hovering exactly, but never far enough to ignore, occasionally pointing out small details about the pool system, things no ordinary caretaker would care about, and definitely things he shouldn't know unless he had a lot more authority than he claimed. "You'll want to check the filter pressure before you leave," he said casually, and Emily frowned. "That's not usually my responsibility," she replied. But he only gave a small shrug, like rules didn't really apply here. The longer she worked, the more things didn't add up: the absence of staff, the security cameras subtly placed at every angle, the fact that no one had introduced themselves as the actual owner, and yet everything ran with quiet precision, as if someone was always watching, always deciding. Then came the moment that made her pause completely. A black SUV pulled into the driveway, sleek, expensive, the kind of car you only saw in business districts or outside five-star hotels, and a man in a suit stepped out, glanced at Daniel, and nodded, not casually, not like co-workers, but with clear respect, almost deference. And for a split second, Daniel's entire demeanor shifted, his posture straightening just enough to reveal something he had been hiding, something powerful, controlled, and very real, before he noticed Emily watching and instantly returned to that relaxed, almost invisible version of himself. "Just a vendor," he said lightly, brushing it off. But Emily didn't believe him, not anymore, because vendors didn't nod like that, and caretakers didn't carry themselves like they owned the ground they stood on. As the sun dipped lower and the golden light reflected off the water, Emily felt the weight of the place pressing in on her, every detail whispering the same thing: something isn't right. And when Daniel looked at her again, there was a flicker in his eyes, something unreadable, something that made her wonder if coming back here, for the money, for survival, had just pulled her into something far bigger than she understood, something she might not be able to walk away from so easily anymore. Emily Carter told herself she was overthinking it, that a big house with strange rules did not automatically mean something was wrong. But as she packed up her equipment near the edge of the pool, she could still feel Daniel Brooks watching her, not in a threatening way, but in a way that felt intentional, like every move she made mattered more than it should. "You work a lot of jobs like this?" he asked, his voice calm, almost too calm, and Emily wiped her hands on a towel before answering. "Whatever pays the bills," she said honestly, because there was no point pretending otherwise. And for a brief second, something in Daniel's expression shifted, like he understood that answer more than she expected. "That is not easy," he replied, and she let out a small laugh, shaking her head. Easy is not really an option where I come from. And that was the truth, because easy did not cover rent, did not keep the lights on, and definitely did not give you a second chance after getting fired without warning. Daniel nodded slowly, like he was storing every word she said somewhere. And then he did something that made her pause again. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small folded note, and placed it on the table beside her equipment. If anything here feels off, you can call this number, he said quietly. Someone will answer. And Emily stared at the note without touching it, her instincts telling her that normal jobs did not come with emergency contact numbers handed out by quiet men who claimed to be caretakers. Why would I need that? She asked, and Daniel held her gaze just long enough to make the silence feel heavy before answering. Just in case. And that was it. No explanation, no elaboration, just another layer of mystery added to everything else that already did not make sense. The sound of footsteps echoed from inside the house, and Emily glanced up as two more people appeared through the glass doors, both dressed in business attire, both moving with purpose, and both immediately acknowledging Daniel with subtle nods that looked far too respectful for someone who supposedly just worked there. And this time, Emily did not look away. She watched closely, noticing how Daniel barely responded, just a slight tilt of his head, but the control in that small gesture said more than words ever could. You are not just a caretaker, she said suddenly, the words slipping out before she could stop them, and for the first time since she met him, Daniel did not answer right away. Instead, he looked at her like he was deciding something, weighing options she could not see, and then he gave a faint smile that did not quite reach his eyes. I told you I work here, he said, but now it sounded less like an explanation and more like a carefully chosen line. Emily felt a mix of frustration and curiosity tightening in her chest, because she could walk away, finish the job, take the money, and never come back. That would be the smart thing to do. But something about this place, about him, made it impossible to ignore. Like there was a story unfolding just beneath the surface, and she was already part of it whether she liked it or not. People do not just double someone's pay for no reason, she said, testing him, watching for any crack in his calm demeanor. And for a moment, there it was, a flicker of something real, something almost like concern, before he masked it again. Sometimes they do when they find someone reliable, he replied. But Emily could tell that was not the whole truth, not even close. The sky was beginning to darken, soft lights around the pool flickering on automatically, casting reflections that danced across the water. And the entire scene felt too perfect, too controlled, like every detail had been planned in advance, including her being there. She picked up the folded note slowly, turning it between her fingers, and when she looked back at Daniel, she realized something that made her pulse quicken slightly. He was not just observing her. He was waiting to see what she would do next, as if her choices mattered in ways she did not understand yet. And that was the moment Emily Carter stopped thinking of this as just another job, because deep down, she knew she had stepped into something far more complicated than a pool to clean. And whatever Daniel Brooks was hiding, it was not something small. It was something that was already pulling her in, one quiet decision at a time. Emily Carter did not call the number that night, but she did not throw it away either, and that alone told her something had already changed, because normally she kept her world simple: work, home, repeat, no complications, no unnecessary risks. But as she sat at her small kitchen table later that evening, staring at the folded piece of paper beside her phone, she could not shake the feeling that she had stepped into something carefully designed, something that had been set in motion long before she walked through those gates again. The next morning, she returned to the mansion earlier than scheduled, telling herself it was just to finish the job faster. But deep down she knew that was not the real reason. She needed answers, or at least something that made sense. And when the gates opened without her even needing to press the call button, that uneasy feeling came rushing back stronger than before. The house looked exactly the same, quiet, perfect, untouched, but this time she noticed details she had missed before, small things, like how the security cameras subtly adjusted as she walked past, or how the lights inside the house shifted automatically, as if responding to movement. And it made her wonder just how much of this place was being controlled behind the scenes. She set down her equipment and headed toward the pool, expecting Daniel Brooks to appear like he had yesterday, and sure enough, within minutes, She felt his presence again before she even saw him. "You are early," he said, and Emily turned, crossing her arms slightly. "And you always show up right when I do," she replied, her tone sharper than before, because she was done pretending this was normal, and Daniel studied her for a moment, like he could tell something had shifted in her. "You seem different today," he said quietly, and Emily did not hesitate this time. "Because this is not just a job, is it?" she asked, holding his gaze, and for a brief second, the air between them felt heavier, like the truth was right there, just out of reach. Daniel exhaled slowly, looking away toward the water before speaking. "It is a job," he said, but there was something careful about how he said it, like he was choosing each word with precision, and Emily shook her head, taking a step closer. "Then why me?" she asked, and that question landed harder than anything else she had said so far, because for the first time, Daniel did not answer at all. Instead, he looked at her with an intensity that made her heart skip slightly, not out of fear, but because she realized he had expected that question eventually, just not this soon. "You are reliable," he said after a moment, repeating the same line from before, but now it sounded even less convincing, and Emily let out a quiet breath, almost laughing. "There are hundreds of reliable people in this city," she said. "You picked me." And again, silence, and that silence spoke louder than any explanation he could have given. Before either of them could say more, a voice echoed from inside the house, calling Daniel's name, not casually, not like a coworker, but with urgency. And when Emily turned, she saw a woman in a tailored suit standing by the glass doors, holding a tablet, her expression focused, and what caught Emily's attention was not the woman herself, but the way she looked at Daniel, not with familiarity, but with expectation, like she was waiting for instructions. Daniel glanced at Emily briefly, something unreadable in his eyes, before walking toward the house. And as he passed the woman, Emily noticed how their interaction confirmed everything she had been suspecting. The woman did not speak first, she waited, and when Daniel gave a short nod, only then did she begin talking, showing him something on the tablet, and whatever it was, it clearly mattered. Emily stood there, watching, her thoughts racing, because this was no longer subtle. This was not a misunderstanding. Daniel Brooks was not just someone who worked there. He was someone people answered to, someone who made decisions, and the realization sent a quiet wave of tension through her chest. A few minutes later, Daniel returned, his expression back to calm, controlled, like nothing had happened. But Emily was no longer the same person who walked in yesterday. She had seen enough to know she was being kept in the dark on purpose, and the question was no longer just who he was, but why he was hiding it from her specifically. "You should finish up for today," Daniel said, his tone gentler now, almost careful, and Emily narrowed her eyes slightly. "You keep telling me what to do, but you still have not told me the truth," she replied, and this time, instead of deflecting, Daniel stepped closer, just enough to lower his voice. "Some truths change things," he said quietly, "and once you know them, you cannot go back." And something about the way he said it made her pause, not because she was afraid, but because she realized he was not warning her about him. He was warning her about what would happen next. And as Emily Carter stood there, caught between walking away and digging deeper, she understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever Daniel Brooks was hiding, it was not just a secret, it was a turning point, and she was already standing right at the edge of it. Emily Carter should have left right then, should have taken the money, finished the job, and never come back. But the way Daniel Brooks said those words lingered in her mind long after she walked out of the gates, like a quiet warning that refused to fade. And that night, as she sat alone in her apartment, the silence felt different, heavier, filled with thoughts she could not ignore, because for the first time in a long time, it was not just about surviving anymore. It was about understanding. And that need grew stronger with every passing minute. The next day, she did not wait to be scheduled. She showed up again, earlier than before, determined to get ahead of whatever was happening. And as expected, the gates opened without question, like the house had already accepted her presence as something permanent, something expected, and that realization alone made her uneasy. When she reached the pool, everything was already perfectly maintained, cleaner than she had left it, as if someone had come in after her and erased every trace of work. And that made no sense, Because why pay her if someone else was going to redo everything? Unless the job itself was not the real reason she was there. You are starting to notice things. Daniel's voice came from behind her again, calm but knowing, and Emily turned quickly this time, no longer surprised by his timing. I am starting to realize this is not about cleaning a pool, she said, her tone firm, and Daniel did not deny it, which only confirmed what she already suspected. Instead, he stepped closer, his expression softer than before, almost like he was trying to make something easier for her. Does it matter? He asked quietly, and Emily let out a small breath, shaking her head. Yes, it matters, she replied, because I do not like being part of something I do not understand. And that honesty hung between them, unfiltered and real. And for a moment, Daniel looked like he respected that, even if he was not ready to respond to it fully. Then maybe you should not be here, he said, not as a threat, but as a genuine suggestion. And that was what made it harder, because it sounded like he actually meant it, like he was giving her an out, a chance to walk away before things went further. But Emily did not move. She stayed exactly where she was, meeting his gaze. If I leave, I will never know the truth, she said, and Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, the smallest sign of tension she had seen from him so far. Before he could answer, the sound of a phone vibrating broke the moment, and Daniel glanced at it briefly before silencing it without even checking the screen, and that small action told Emily something important. Whatever was on that phone, whoever was calling, it was not more important than this conversation, and that realization shifted something inside her, because people like him did not ignore things unless they chose to. You keep asking questions, Daniel said after a moment, his voice lower now, more serious, but you have not asked the one that actually matters. And Emily frowned slightly. Which is? She asked, and Daniel held her gaze, steady and unshaken. Why you were brought back, he said, and for a second, everything seemed to go quiet, because she had been so focused on him, on his identity, on his role in all of this, that she had not fully considered that question from the right angle. You said I was reliable, she replied, but even as she said it, she knew that was not enough, not for something like this, not for the way everything around her was being controlled so precisely. Daniel took a step closer, just enough to lower his voice again, and this time, there was no distance in his tone, no deflection, just something direct, something real. That is part of it, he admitted, and Emily felt her pulse pick up slightly, because that was the first time he had acknowledged there was more. Then what is the rest? She asked, and this time, Daniel did not answer right away. Instead, he looked at her like he was measuring something she could not see, like he was deciding how much to reveal and how much to hold back, and the tension in that silence was enough to make her realize that whatever came next would change everything. Finally, he spoke, but not with the clarity she expected. Some people walk into a place and see what is on the surface, he said slowly. And some people notice what does not belong. And Emily felt a chill run through her, not from fear, but from recognition, because he was not just describing people in general, he was describing her. And you think I am one of those people? She asked, and Daniel gave the slightest nod. I know you are, he replied. And in that moment, Emily Carter understood something that made it impossible to turn back now. She was not here by accident. She was here because she had been chosen, and the question was no longer whether she should stay or leave, but what exactly she had been chosen for, and why Daniel Brooks was the one standing at the center of it all. Emily Carter felt the weight of his words long after he said them, not because they were loud or dramatic, but because they landed too precisely, like he had seen something in her that she had not even fully acknowledged herself, and that realization made everything around her feel sharper, more intentional, as if every moment she had spent in this place had been quietly leading to this exact point. Chosen for what? She asked, her voice steady but edged with something deeper now, something that was no longer just curiosity but a need for clarity. And Daniel Brooks held her gaze without hesitation, but instead of answering directly, he glanced toward the house again, where movement behind the glass walls hinted at activity she was not part of, and then back at her, as if weighing whether she was ready for something he had not yet said out loud. If I tell you everything, he began slowly, it changes how you see this place, how you see me, and how you see yourself in all of it. And Emily frowned slightly, because that was not an answer. It was another layer of delay, Another carefully placed barrier, and she was starting to recognize the pattern. He never lied, but he never gave the full truth either. "You keep deciding what I can handle," she said, taking a small step closer. "But you do not actually know me." And for the first time, something in Daniel's expression shifted in a way she had not seen before, not controlled, not calculated, but almost uncertain, like she had said something that mattered more than she realized. "I know enough," he replied quietly, but it did not sound as confident as before, and that alone told her she was getting closer to something real. Before the moment could settle, the same woman from earlier stepped outside again, this time moving more quickly, her posture tense, and when she reached Daniel, she spoke in a low voice that Emily could not fully hear, but the urgency in her tone was clear, and whatever she said, it made Daniel's attention shift immediately, his focus snapping away from Emily in a way that felt different from before, sharper, more commanding. "I will handle it," he said to the woman, and there it was again, that subtle authority, not loud, not forced, but undeniable, and Emily watched as the woman nodded without question and stepped back, waiting, not suggesting, not advising, just waiting for his next move. Daniel turned back to Emily, and for a brief second, the two sides of him seemed to overlap, the quiet man who stood by the pool and the one who clearly controlled everything happening behind those glass walls. And it made her realize that whatever he was hiding was not just about identity. It was about power, influence, something far bigger than a simple explanation. "You should go home for today," he said. But this time it was not a suggestion, it was a decision. And Emily felt a flicker of resistance rise in her chest. "And miss, whatever is happening right now?" she asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. And Daniel did not respond immediately, which only confirmed that something was happening, something he did not want her to see yet. "This is exactly what I meant," he said finally, his voice calmer again, but more distant, like he was stepping back into that controlled version of himself. "There are things here that do not involve you." And Emily let out a quiet breath, shaking her head. "Except you brought me into it," she replied, and that landed. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened slightly, the way his eyes held hers just a second longer than before. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything neither of them was saying. And then Daniel did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket again, but this time, instead of a folded note, he pulled out a small access card, sleek, black, unmarked, and held it out to her. Emily stared at it without taking it, her mind racing, because this was not a simple gesture. This was a choice, and choices like this came with consequences she did not fully understand yet. "What is this?" she asked, and Daniel did not hesitate this time. "If you want answers," he said quietly, "you are going to need more than questions." And for a moment, the world around her seemed to narrow down to that single object in his hand, because she understood what he was offering without him needing to explain it. Access, not just to the house, but to whatever truth he had been keeping just out of reach. "And if I take it?" she asked, her voice lower now, more serious, and Daniel's expression softened just slightly, but there was still that underlying tension, that awareness of what this meant. "Then you are choosing to see what most people never do," he said, and Emily felt her heartbeat quicken, not from fear, but from the realization that this was the moment everything would shift, because once she stepped beyond this point, there would be no pretending this was just a job anymore. She looked from the card to him, searching his face for any sign of doubt, any indication that this was a mistake, but all she saw was certainty, quiet, controlled, but real, and slowly, without breaking eye contact. Emily Carter reached out and took the card, not fully knowing what she was stepping into, but understanding one thing with absolute clarity: whatever was waiting on the other side of that choice, it was going to change everything. Emily Carter felt the weight of the access card the moment it touched her palm, far heavier than something that small should have been, because it was not just a piece of plastic, it was a decision. And as she looked at Daniel Brooks, she realized he was watching her not with curiosity, but with expectation, like this moment had always been part of the plan. "What exactly does this open?" she asked, turning the card slightly between her fingers, and Daniel's response came without hesitation. "That depends on how far you are willing to go." And that answer alone told her this was not going to be simple, not a single door, not a single truth, but layers, each one revealing something she might not be ready for. The air between them felt different now, no longer just uncertain, but charged, like something had shifted permanently the second she accepted the card. And before she could say anything else, Daniel stepped back slightly, creating space, not distance, but enough to signal that the next move was hers. "You said you wanted answers," he added quietly, and Emily nodded once, her grip tightening slightly around the card. "I do," she said, and for the first time since this began, there was no hesitation in her voice. Daniel studied her for a brief moment, then gestured toward the house, not with authority, but with invitation, and that subtle difference mattered more than she expected. Emily turned toward the glass doors, her heart beating a little faster with each step, not out of fear, but anticipation. Because she could feel it now, she was no longer on the outside of something strange. She was walking directly into it. As she approached, the doors opened automatically, smooth and silent, revealing an interior that was even more controlled than the exterior. Clean lines, minimal design, everything in its place. But what stood out to her was not the luxury. It was the movement, people walking with purpose, voices low, conversations brief and focused. And the moment she stepped inside, several of them glanced in her direction, not with confusion, but recognition, as if her presence there had already been accounted for. Emily slowed slightly, taking it all in, and when she looked back, Daniel was no longer right behind her. He had stopped just outside the entrance, watching, and that told her something important. This part, whatever she was about to see, he wanted her to experience it on her own. She moved deeper into the space, the sound of her footsteps soft against the polished floor, and as she walked, she noticed subtle details that confirmed everything she had been suspecting. Screens displaying data she could not fully understand, people speaking in tones that suggested decisions were being made, not discussed, and at the center of it all, a quiet sense of structure, like every piece of this place was part of something larger. Then she saw it, a hallway slightly to the right, less open than the rest, more private, and at the end of it, a door that stood out not because of how it looked, but because of how everything around it seemed to avoid it, like an unspoken boundary. Emily felt the card in her hand again, and without fully thinking it through, she started walking toward that hallway, each step pulling her further away from the version of this situation she could still pretend was normal. As she reached the door, she paused, her reflection faintly visible in the surface, and for a moment, doubt flickered, not about Daniel, not about the house, but about herself, about whether she was ready to see whatever was behind this, because deep down, she knew that once she opened this door, there would be no going back to simple explanations. She lifted the card slowly, holding it near the reader beside the door, and for a second, nothing happened, just silence, just her own breath steadying, and then a soft click broke through, quiet but definitive, followed by the door unlocking. Emily hesitated only for a heartbeat before pushing it open, stepping inside, and what she saw on the other side made her stop completely, not because it was shocking in a loud or dramatic way, but because it confirmed something far more unsettling. Everything in that room pointed to one undeniable truth. Daniel Brooks was not just connected to this place. He was at the center of it. Every decision, every movement, every detail traced back to him. And the realization hit her all at once. She had not been brought here to clean a pool. She had been brought here to be tested, to be observed, to be chosen for something she still did not fully understand. And as Emily Carter stood there, the door closing quietly behind her, she knew that whatever came next, she had just crossed a line she could never uncross. Emily Carter stood frozen in the center of the room, her eyes scanning every detail as her mind tried to catch up with what she was seeing, because this was no ordinary space, not a private office, not a hidden storage area, but something far more deliberate, a command center designed with precision, screens lining the walls displaying live feeds of different parts of the property, data streams moving in real time, schedules, financial charts, security layouts, all organized in a way that made one thing unmistakably clear. This place was being run like an operation, and at the center of it all was one name that appeared again and again across different displays, Brooks. Her breath slowed as she stepped closer, drawn in by the clarity of it, the undeniable structure, And then she noticed something that made her pulse tighten slightly. A file open on one of the screens, not just any file, but one labeled with her own name, Emily Carter. For a moment, everything else faded. The quiet hum of the room, the soft glow of the monitors, all of it narrowing down to that single detail. Because this was not coincidence. This was intention. She moved closer, her eyes scanning the information quickly, not fully understanding all of it, but enough to recognize patterns, dates, notes, observations, details about her work history, her routines, even small things she had never told anyone. And the realization hit her with quiet force. She had not just been noticed, she had been studied. You were not supposed to see that yet. Daniel Brooks' voice came from behind her, calm but no longer distant, and Emily turned sharply, the weight of everything she had just seen rising to the surface. How long? She asked, her voice steady but filled with something deeper now, not fear, but betrayal, and Daniel did not look away, did not deflect. He met her gaze directly. Long enough to know you are exactly who I thought you were, he said, and that answer, instead of calming anything, only made the tension sharper. You have been watching me, she said, not as a question, but a statement, and Daniel nodded once, slow and deliberate. Observing, he corrected, and that single word changed the tone completely, because it suggested purpose, not curiosity, design, not chance. Emily let out a quiet breath, shaking her head slightly as she tried to process it. You brought me here, she said. You doubled my pay, you gave me access. All of this just to watch me, and for the first time, Daniel's expression shifted into something more open, less controlled, like he had reached the point where hiding it no longer served a purpose. Not just to watch, he said, stepping closer into the light of the room, and now there was no separation between the man she met by the pool and the one standing in front of her, both sides fully present, fully visible. To see how you think, how you respond, how you handle things when they do not make sense. And Emily felt something in her chest tighten, because that meant every moment, every decision she had made since stepping through those gates had been part of something larger. Why me? She asked again. But this time the question carried more weight, more demand for truth. And Daniel did not hesitate. Because you notice what others ignore, he said. Because you ask questions instead of looking away, and because you keep going even when you do not have all the answers. And as he spoke, Emily realized he was not guessing, he was describing, like he had already confirmed every one of those things. That does not explain this, she said, gesturing to the screens, to the file, to everything around them, and Daniel nodded slightly, acknowledging that she was right. No, it does not, he admitted. But this does, and with that, he stepped toward one of the central screens and tapped it once, and the display shifted instantly, pulling up a new set of information, more structured, more focused, and at the top of it, a single word stood out: initiative. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly as she looked at it, her instincts telling her this was the part that mattered, the part everything had been leading to, and Daniel turned back to her, his expression steady but serious in a way she had not seen before. This is what you were brought into, he said, and there was no more distance in his tone, no more careful avoidance, just truth, finally beginning to surface. And as Emily Carter stood there, surrounded by a reality she had not even known existed, she understood one thing with complete certainty: the life she had been trying to hold together, the simple routine she had relied on. It had already shifted the moment she walked through those gates, and now, standing face to face with Daniel Brooks, and everything he represented, there was no going back to who she was before, only forward into something she still did not fully understand, but was already a part of whether she chose it or not. Emily Carter stared at the screen as the word initiative lingered in front of her, simple, almost understated, but carrying a weight she could feel without fully understanding. And for a moment, she did not speak, not because she had no questions, but because she realized the answer she was about to hear would change how she saw everything, including herself. What is this? She asked finally, her voice quieter now, more controlled, and Daniel Brooks stepped closer to the screen, his presence no longer hidden, no longer divided, just clear and direct. It is a system, he said, one that identifies people who do not follow predictable patterns, people who make decisions differently. And Emily frowned slightly, her eyes moving across the data as she tried to connect what he was saying to what she was seeing. "You mean people like me?" she said, and Daniel nodded without hesitation. "Exactly like you," he replied, and there was no exaggeration in his tone, no attempt to impress, just a statement of fact. Emily crossed her arms slightly, her mind working through it. "So you watch people, study them, and then what?" she asked, and Daniel exhaled slowly, like he had reached the part of the explanation that mattered most. "Then we offer them a choice," he said, and that word again, choice, it kept coming back, but every time it did, it felt less like an option and more like something inevitable. "A choice to do what?" she pressed, and Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, as if measuring whether she was ready to hear the full answer. "To step into something bigger than their current life," he said, "to be part of decisions that affect more than just themselves." And Emily felt a slight tension build in her chest, because that sounded important, significant even, but it also sounded like something that came with a cost. "And if they say no?" she asked, and for the first time, Daniel paused, not long, but long enough for the silence to carry meaning. "Then they go back to their life," he said finally, "but they do not forget what they have seen." And something about that answer made her realize that even saying no would not truly return things to how they were before. Emily turned back to the screen, her own name still visible among the data, and it felt different now, not just information, but a reflection of how someone else saw her. How someone like Daniel had already decided she was capable of something more. "You could have just told me," she said after a moment, her voice steady but edged with something personal now. "Instead of all this," and she gestured slightly around the room, and Daniel's expression softened just enough to show that he understood what she meant. "If I had told you everything at once," he said, "you would not have believed it, and you would have walked away." And Emily did not argue, because deep down, she knew he was right. The version of her from just a few days ago would have dismissed all of this as unrealistic, too complicated, too far from the life she knew. "So you tested me," she said, and Daniel nodded once. "I gave you opportunities to see how you respond when things do not make sense," he corrected, but the meaning was the same, and Emily let out a slow breath, absorbing it, because every moment suddenly had a different context. Every question she asked, every decision she made, it had all been part of something structured, something intentional. "And now?" she asked, turning to face him fully, and this time, there was no hesitation in her stance, no uncertainty in her gaze, just a quiet readiness to hear whatever came next. Daniel met her eyes, steady and certain. "Now you decide," he said, and the simplicity of that statement contrasted sharply with everything surrounding it, because this was not a small decision, not something that could be brushed aside or postponed. This was a turning point. Emily glanced once more at the screen, at the data, at the reflection of herself through someone else's perspective, and then back at Daniel. And for the first time, she saw him not as a mystery, not as someone hiding something, but as someone who had already stepped into the kind of life he was offering her, someone who understood exactly what this choice meant. "And if I say yes?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying the weight of everything she had experienced since stepping through those gates, and Daniel did not look away, did not soften the truth. "Then nothing about your life stays the same," he said, and there was no warning in his tone, no persuasion, just honesty, and that was what made it real. Emily Carter stood there for a moment longer, feeling the shift happening inside her, the quiet realization that the life she had been holding on to, the routines, the limits, they had already begun to change the moment she chose to come back, and now, standing in front of the truth, the only thing left was whether she would step forward fully or walk away knowing she could have been part of something more. And as she looked at Daniel Brooks, at the room, at everything that had been revealed, she understood that this was not just about opportunity, it was about who she was willing to become. Emily Carter did not answer right away, not because she was unsure, but because she understood the weight of what she was about to say. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to pause, to actually consider something beyond survival, beyond the next bill, beyond the routine she had built just to keep going. She looked at the screen again, at the version of herself reflected through data and observation, and then back at Daniel Brooks, who stood there without pressure, without expectation in his expression, just quiet certainty, like he already knew that whatever she chose, it would be deliberate. "You said this is a choice," she said slowly, her voice calm but grounded, and Daniel nodded once. "It is," he replied, and Emily took a small breath, steadying her thoughts. "Then I need to understand one thing first," she continued. "If I say yes, I am not just stepping into your world. I am giving up control over my own." And for the first time since the conversation began, Daniel's expression shifted in a way that revealed something deeper, not uncertainty, but respect, because that question mattered. "No," he said clearly. "You are not giving up control, you are expanding it. But it comes with responsibility, decisions that affect more than just you." And Emily studied him closely, searching for any sign that he was holding something back. But this time, there was none, just direct honesty. She nodded slightly, processing that, and then her gaze moved. Again, taking in the room one last time, the screens, the structure, the quiet precision of everything around her, and she realized something that made her decision clearer than she expected. This was not about escaping her life. It was about stepping into something that required more from her than she had ever been asked to give. "And if I walk away?" she asked, testing the other side of the choice, and Daniel did not hesitate. "Then you walk away," he said. "You go back to your life, and this becomes something you experienced but chose not to continue." And again, there was no pressure, no manipulation, just truth, and that was what made it real. Emily let out a slow breath, her thoughts settling into place, because for the first time, the uncertainty she had felt since stepping through those gates was gone, replaced by clarity, not about what would happen next, but about who she wanted to be moving forward. She looked at Daniel again, really looked at him, no longer as a mystery, no longer as someone hiding behind half answers, but as someone who had offered her something rare, not a guarantee, not an easy path, but a chance. "I am not saying yes because of the money," she said, her voice steady, and Daniel gave a slight nod, as if he expected that. "And I am not saying yes because I think this will be easy," she continued, and there was a quiet strength in her tone now, something that had been building since the moment she chose to come back. She paused for just a second, not out of hesitation, but to make sure what she said next was exactly what she meant. "I am saying yes because I want to see how far I can go." And the moment the words left her, something shifted, not in the room, not in Daniel, but in her, like a line had been crossed internally, a decision fully made. Daniel held her gaze for a moment longer, and then for the first time since this began, he allowed a small, genuine smile to form, not controlled, not calculated, just real. "Then we begin," he said, and there was no dramatic change in his tone, no sudden movement, just a quiet acknowledgement that everything had moved forward. Emily felt a strange sense of calm settle in, not because she knew what would happen next, but because she had chosen it, and that made all the difference. As she stood there, the room no longer felt overwhelming. It felt like a starting point, a place she had stepped into by choice, and when Daniel turned slightly, gesturing toward the rest of the space beyond, it was not an invitation anymore. It was the next step. Emily Carter followed without hesitation, not because she had all the answers, but because she had decided she did not need them all right now. Only the willingness to keep moving forward, and as the door behind her remained closed, the life she had known just days ago faded quietly into the background, replaced by something far more complex, far more demanding, and for the first time, exactly what she wanted.